だいたい私こうやって公表してるからね。特にこれは注目した。グリーンゲンデール。
So my sense is the way that you revivify democracy is by remembering its fundamental insistence that the individual is
United Nations
and that everything you can possibly do to fortify the individual simultaneously, the individual is the eyes of the state, is that where the living individual is the eyes of the dead state, and the living individual revivifies the state. And to the degree that we forget our concentration on the sovereignty of the individual, right, the divine sovereignty of the individual for that matter, then we undermine the foundation on which democracy is based. And then people look for alternatives. They search for meaning elsewhere, in the extremes of one form or another, or they collapse into a kind of nihilism that's completely counterproductive. And so, well, that's been my experience.
まだベルンハルト作ったらしい。あれね、なんか書いてん。まあ笑いのね、ベルナバーグみたいなの作る。会見したよ。準備期間に入ったって報告して。
Liberal democracy can survive the current period of disruption, but it's going to have to change. The volatility and the risks that we are witnessing across much of the Western world are anchored in some very deep changes that have been swirling beneath our democracy, that have been coming for many years and still have a long way to run. They relate to strong feelings of distrust in the political system, widespread fears over the perceived destruction of ways of life, national identity, big worries over deprivation, the way in which the economic settlement is playing out, and weakening bonds between the mainstream parties and ordinary voters. Those four currents have been with us for a very long time, before the Great Recession, before the arrival of Facebook and Twitter and big tech, but they are now producing very substantive political effects, and they will continue to produce substantive political effects. So liberal democracy has to change. It has to make its political systems more representative. It has to ensure that people feel that their nations and communities are secure and have strong and robust external borders. And it also, over the long term, needs to devise an economic settlement that ensures that everybody feels that they are relatively getting the gains and the benefits that other groups in society are getting as well. Very big challenges, no clear answer as to now. The ball is very much in liberal democracy's court.
田中は聞いたよね。やめろ。解散宣言せえ、そのうちです。
So bringing trilateral to Slovenia means also bringing Slovenia to trilateral. And as you know, David Rockefeller Fellows had a brief program. It is our pleasure that we connected them to the MCHM breakfast, Slovenian Business Society. They were talking about the global issues and how connected the world is with some local representatives and even some members of trilateral. It is also our pleasure that the former Prime Minister, who is the current Minister for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Meatnarcets, had the time to meet with them and discuss where the Europe is today and where the Europe is going. And of course, we have finished our program with amazing lunch with Professor Dana Zohar.
ごっそりね。ごめん、支えてみます。岡顧問か。すみません。
Liberal democracy will not survive in an unchanged form. It has not been changing enough to accommodate the fast, speedy development of the internet and of the communication technologies. And it has been changing too much, even
経済界のお姉さん、堂々と日本経済団体連合会、この会長、分かった、かっこ、パペットでした。逆でした。井上マリナのそうでした。荒見系は逆に言うと岸信介でした。はい。上川君にやってますね。アリバイがありますか。目的証拠でした。だいたいこの時点で安保闘争まだ続けたんですよ。そうやったどう説明するんだね、これは。だいたい外務省から所管って5名。こっそり5名、これ、愛媛県ね。ああ、もしかして。高知で、みんな、避難していたね。多分みんな。知ってるはずは四国行った。知ってるかな。知ってるよ、多分。高松空港とか松山空港。そんなとこにや。高松基地とか。松山基地とかあるよね。細く100。はい、さあ、主力部隊の四国。全部してた。
Export oriented, is very successful on world markets, but most of the companies are not only delivering cars to other parts of the world, they are also producing cars.
群衆もさ、できるかって言ったよ、ほんの。大体、JA がもう言ってると、大体こんな状況が出ていないと思うんで、うつせてさ、うつせてこれできるか。三井不動産も知ってました。ちゃんと我々残ってました。残念ですけど、ベルガーバーグ・チャタムズ・ルールで福岡にしました。なんかソニーはほっとけ。ほとんど除名されてるような状態だ。ほとんど除名されてる状態。もう知ってた。大きいロマーティン・ジェームズ。森田、捜査を受けたのはやつで。安保闘争の。加害者。バッドタイム資金提供。あいつ資金提供してたのが皮肉なことにトヨタとスズキ発展しました。車が普及した。これでみんな一斉に移動しました。トヨタね、実は臨時の工場を作ってたんですよ。リールとかここら辺に移して生産してたよ。聞けたよみんな。トヨタの遠隔機見れば見てる。乗ってるからこうしないと乗ってるからちゃんと書いてるからみんな知る。スリトム化学のあれね、逆に天然ガスやった天然ガス工場やったいいところね。別に住み込もう。避難者がいけるけどさ。そんなこと森田の時はい。ちょっと森田の
feels called to lead, called to serve. There's a sense of purpose, a sense of higher meaning in his or her leadership.
バーニングプロダクションとかね、全部安保闘争の弁償前提で結成されました。安保特力でした。皮肉なことに安保成長になりました。高度経済安保闘争特需になりました。発展したよさ、びっくりしたさ。連合赤軍とか、日本赤軍。あれなくてびっくりや。びっくりした。銃撃戦って。多分、まあ、安保闘争終わった後に、またね、やろうと思ったら、蹴散らされたんじゃないかな。まあ、今落ち着いて中核はあります。中核はみたいに、そんなもん。何のこりだって極左勢力に残ってびっくりしたそう。約6年代になって 何でも言ってたよ、今
One
日
of the
ね。
kind of issues you had
危
in
ない
the
って言
US
ってたよね。
presidential election,
皆さんよ、稲川
where
会とか
because of
ね。
the
山口
electoral
組三大
college
山さん
system
ね。
in some states
皆さんよ、
that
って
far
右
more
翼団体傘下に入れてよ。抑え
I
込んで
think
たよ。
we need
遅
to
い。
look
こ
at
れ
the
ね。
kind of electoral
お前に知ってる
system
ってこと
we
はさ、
have and
あ、暴走族走ってるよ。
broad
はいって。
representation rather than a simple binary decision of a first past the post election
いや、
system.
残念な警察の
We
やつ
need
ね。
to think about our asymmetric
喧嘩打ちなんだな。
advantages. We have
俺らの警察だと
we have
思
rule
っ
of
て。
law.
俺らの警察だと。
That's pretty important.
Hello.
And it's interesting. The authoritarian regimes all place their money abroad in places where there is rule of law. Why? Because in an authoritarian regime, you can just lose everything all at once. Someone takes your money. Whereas if it's in the West, or rather in a rule of law country, then that's unlikely. Well, maybe we can make it more difficult to keep your money here. Or we can be much more definitely should be much more transparent about ownership. After all, much of the money laundering that we've seen from the authoritarian states that are attacking goes through anonymous shell companies. These are again issues that need to be taken up by government authorities in order ultimately to
当時
defend
本人だっ
democracy.
た攻撃したよ。あら、よく北米委員会で攻撃したの知ってるだろ。見抜いてた。残念な田中幸死んでもらうぞ。俺が大総統みたいな首相になったら攻撃するからな。それはレタの兵器の実験。なぜ埼玉なんかお前ここに移ってるの知ってるだろ。太しのあたりに交流センター作ったの知ってるだろ。知ったわ。俺が引き継いだんだ。大体ですよ。監修受けたから受けてないやろ。実際言うか。フィリップ元王愛が意識してますよ。反対したみたいなね。誰が認めるか。みんなチャイナ枠にして、知らない。お前らね、待ってたぞ。残念でした。田中明子4人責任転嫁する。認められようが、サイバーってこれですね、人気ないって証拠やった。サイバーで何もできんって分かった。こいつでした、俺の山よで。 この清美何ごめんもうお前保護者気取りかこれ詐欺師大詐欺師これお前なんで生きてないんだっけこいつ人気ないから知名度アップするわ埼玉どうするんだ埼玉基金かお前らも関係や最初から首つっかなつっかなかな っ込むな。もういい。四国壊滅させたのお前か。もうこいつほっとけ。さすが埼玉はね、反省拒否精神。もう勝手にしろ。相手する気もない。俺は今ね、今これ宣伝してる。あれはこれ
Silicon Valley provides a unique ecosystem, basically in some sense a network of having a very strong university that's very applied, that is all about working with the real world, doing basic research and then trying to put that basic research into the society, into the good. An important thing, I think, is also that it's a social network of sharing. Is that basically in California there is no non-competes, so people move around freely, and this means that the flow of innovation is much faster. The other important thing is the size, the critical mass, again of very large amounts of talent, so that companies can be scaled up very quickly. For example, in my own experience, I started working with Pinterest when there was less than 200 of us. 3 years later, there is a few thousand of us. And the company culture and everything wasn't lost, and the new people got hired. And then I think the last thing is that universities, as well as kind of companies, focus less on protecting their IP and really trying to move as fast as possible. Because if we think about innovation is about moving fast, and it's not so much about building walls and figuring out how to do the next step very carefully. It's really about running and iterating fast. And if we run and iterate fast, then the success will be there, and kind of little details don't matter that much. And I think this is important from the viewpoint of university, letting the research be put in the public domain and really benefit the environments in which the university's professors operate, as well as in terms of companies sharing the information and flow of people with each other. So there is, for example, in Silicon Valley, a lot of different seminars, people from one company visiting the other company, sharing quite openly actually what they are doing, writing academic papers, again talking about their latest solutions, so that we are all up to date, and the entire system can kind of help each other in terms of making the most innovation and the most progress in the short amount of time. Because I think the question is not can we innovate, but the question is, or can we invent something? But the question about innovation is, can we be the first ones to do something? So it's as much about the speed as it is about the substance.
We had a really good discussion today. Reviving the European dream is what we really want. The next year will be the election for the European Union, for the Parliament of the European Union, and it is really important that there will be a strong mandate. One of the challenges we are facing at the moment is still the migration crisis, and also the priority of the Austrian presidency is security and the fight against illegal migration. So we had a good discussion today on all these topics, and of course there are different opinions on this, but in general we are always on the same line. We want to have a solution for the European Union and for Europe. Safe, external borders and legal migration because Europe will need it in the end. But people still have in front of their eyes the migration flood in 2015, and therefore it is really important to have a good solution, and a solution which will be implemented in all the countries of the European Union to have a resilient European asylum system.
Migration is currently one of the key issues of European citizens, and my view is that it will remain so, especially because migration is here to stay, and it will probably increase in numbers and complexity because of the political consequences of wars, the terrorism, but also because of the climate change. I think, in my view, migration is needed in Europe. I think it's something that we can benefit from, and I think that we need to change the narrative on this. First and foremost, us as politicians. Actually, the demographic of Europe says that migration is something that we will need in the future in order to maintain and grow our economic development, the quality of life, and I think that we should also go back to the European shared values and the human values that are, I think, the foundation stone of Europe, so that together we can change, as I said, the narrative and help these people, but also help ourselves grow and develop further. Thank you.
私と宣伝係でいい。
Turkey belongs to European family. You know, there is no way that Turkey can distance itself from the realities of Europe. Today, of course, at the Trilateral Commission, we are going to discuss three scenarios: confrontation, cooperation, and membership of Turkey to the EU. In these three scenarios, of course, there are different outcomes. But I would say that confrontation between Turkey and the EU is a complete lose-lose scenario. And if it is only cooperation instead of membership of Turkey to the EU, this will be some sort of limited cooperation, and it will be a scenario in which both Turkey and the EU will not be able to enjoy the full potential. In economics, we say, you know, this is not cost-effective at all. But when it comes to EU membership, I would say that this will mean full use of potential of Turkey and the EU together. This means a stronger, stable, respected, fully democratic Turkey, but this also means in the world scene a global actor of EU, peace-bringing EU, welfare-creating EU, employment-creating EU. So I would say that in this case, membership case, the outcome would be win-win-win. So win for Turkey, win for the EU, but also win for beyond.
今は主役だ。今はね。水曜ね。
You will have to define what you mean by Europe and the European Union having its own army. I do not think Europe needs its own army for what I would qualify as the classical Article 5 NATO scenario. In other words, in a conflict with Russia. But Europe should definitely, the European Union should definitely develop the possibility to project hard power without the United States of America. I can imagine a scenario in Northern Africa where you have a combination of terrorism, climate change, migration. It's an ungoverned part of Africa, largely, where Boko Haram meets Al-Qaeda, where Al-Qaeda meets Daesh. In other words, it's not impossible. Look at the French and what they did and are doing in Mali, that you would need to intervene militarily, and then the European Union would be on its own. Second scenario, virtual but not impossible when in the Balkans the demons of the past would raise again. And we should not repeat a situation like we had in the 90s of the previous century, where finally Bill Clinton and the United States of America had to come in to stabilize the situation. I could think about the need for border protection, external border protection, with military means. You're a bit on the border here between the military and the military police, the gendarmerie in French. In other words, if that is meant by President Macron and Chancellor Merkel with the European army, I can follow them. What we should not forget, by the way, is when you talk about European military intervention, that's why I like the qualification European army not much, is that there will always be national parliaments who will decide if those soldiers will be sent into harm's way. So they will not, I hope, talk about a European command and a European parliament which decides this goes to the heart of the sovereignty of nations, and those nations will want to decide themselves. I see the way out as presented by President Macron of France, the European Intervention Initiative, where you can build coalitions of the willing outside the EU institutions. You can build coalitions of the willing, which you will always need for such kind of military operations. Advantage of a coalition of the willing is that after Brexit you can keep Great Britain on board, because they will not anymore be a member of the European Union. At the same time, PESCO, the Permanent Structures Cooperation, should of course continue, important project, but rather bureaucratic and rather cumbersome. So that would be my answer to the question, does Europe need its own army?
So this morning we had a session on the future of mobility, and we actually discussed what does it mean for the auto industry and what does it mean for the cities. If you look at the auto industry, there has never been as much change as there is today. On the technology side, with connectivity, electrification, autonomous driving, on the social domain, with sharing, more urbanization and new ways of working, and also on the regulation side, where it's about emission control and standards, and also on regulation for managing congestions in the city. So we actually covered that. We also talked about what does it actually mean for the cities? How will actually the traffic evolve if you have more AVs and individual mobility through AVs? What would be levers to actually work on getting a mitigation on traffic, and basically how to deal with heightened traffic from autonomous vehicles? What would be the impact of actually sharing more cars, of basically having smaller or basically bus-based autonomous vehicles? And actually, how would you deal with competency-based pricing? How would you actually work as a city to make the whole modal mix work, and in the end get to a better transportation for the whole city?
田中駅子に文句言ってた。あいつやってん。埼玉の県が。もう知ってますよ。文句言いに行ってたよ。残念なの宣伝してますよ。ごめん。現場に行きました。
as attractive as possible in the global competition, which order is the better one. Some people wonder why best practices in government haven't spread faster amongst the democracies. When you see, for example, that New Zealand has solved the problem of public finance, why doesn't everybody copy it? Why doesn't everybody copy the way that the South Koreans teach their kids mathematics? Why doesn't everybody copy the way the Swiss decentralize their politics? And I think part of the answer is that we don't really spend nearly enough time looking at what is best practice. I live in the United States, though I grew up in the United Kingdom. One hardly ever hears a reference to other countries' systems in the US debate on healthcare, except when somebody is making a completely caricatured analysis of the way, say, Canada does things. So I think part of what we need to do is stress the need to look at best practice so that politicians and voters become more aware that there are solutions to most of the public policy problems. We just haven't tried them in many countries. On the other hand, I think there's one other side to this that one shouldn't forget. Sometimes you'll meet people who'll tell you, well, the Scandinavians have worked everything out, and Sweden or Finland or Denmark has come up with the perfect solution to policy problems. That's often an argument people make on the left in the United States. But I don't think the solutions that the Swedes came up with in recent decades necessarily would work in a country as large and as diverse as the United States. So let's look at best practice. Let's understand which systems deliver the best results. But let's not pretend that one size is going to fit all. Part of the reason for the success of Western civilization, which is where democracy began, was the diversity of systems and the competition between them.
I recently read that information is now the world's most consequential and contested geopolitical resource. I think that's right. Global internet penetration has revolutionized the information domain. And information operations, which aren't new, are dramatically expanding in scale and scope. This is a new challenge for media organizations, which are already facing a business model crisis and declining trust. Meanwhile, AI advances confer strategic advantage to those with access to lots of data. This has implications for privacy, but also for the information advantage that democracies have traditionally enjoyed.
Diplomacy, European diplomacy exists? It's not an easy question, and the answer is yes and no. Yes, in an institutional sense, that is, Mrs. Mogherini today exists, she travels, she can deliver some messages for Europe, but I would say certainly not on the most fundamental issues of foreign policy, because members of the European Union are, many of them, very old nation states, that they have their own foreign policy, defense, security apparatus, and so forth and so on. And I cannot imagine the French diplomacy just to be the second to the European diplomacy, and the same with the UK, as long as the UK is in the EU, or the German diplomacy, and I could continue the list. So, in my judgment, the best merit of the EU diplomacy is first to perhaps reduce as much as possible the differences between the various diplomacies of the member states. And this, as such, is not so bad. And also, I think the EU diplomacy can deal with some relatively secondary issues, such as, for instance, I'm thinking of the Timor case in Indonesia, that is, issues which are not at the forefront of national diplomacies, but which nevertheless can have some importance. So, to conclude, I would say that the real European diplomacy will exist only the day when the Europeans have a clear understanding of what they want to achieve, what is the identity of the European Union still to be built, because diplomacy, like defense, has to do with the protecting the identity of a political answer this question. What is our identity and what is it exactly that we want to
なんだ
protect?
ろうと思ったね。なんかでかいかな。
No, they're certainly similar in one respect that Thucydides wrote about brilliantly in his book on the Peloponnesian War. That when a rising power, as Thucydides wrote about Athens, threatens to displace a ruling power like Sparta, or in the current situation, a rising China threatens to displace the ruling U.S., alarm bells should sound, grave danger ahead, a significant likelihood of war, real bloody war.
I think China's rise will change the international configuration from the unipolar to bipolar, and also possibly make the world order and different from before. But it doesn't mean that the China's rise is the only factor to change the current international order. And actually, the Trump administration's policy is more challenging than China's rise to the current international order. Because China's policy tries to maintain the order, the reason is very obvious. China benefits from the present order, and meanwhile, the Trump administration believes, and China benefits more from the current order than the United States. That's why they want to change the order, and based on the ideology of anti-establishmentism. So from my understanding, if we're talking about what the ideology and challenging the current international order or the liberalist order is the anti-establishmentism in U.S. and the populism in the Europe.
I think in economic terms, it's already shaping up to be the Chinese century. By 2014, according to the IMF, China was the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity, and in other respects, China is already the world's largest manufacturer, the world's largest exporter, the world's largest market for a great many important commodities such as vehicles. The question is whether that economic power translates into political power and strategic power, because I think most people would agree, probably even in Beijing, that America remains the world's dominant political power. And the question is, will that economic mismatch between economic power and strategic power change, and China will become the dominant power, not just economically, but politically? It's too soon to tell that, however, on that, because there are a lot of different variables. Will there be a direct conflict between China and the US, for example, over the dominance of the Pacific? Will China perhaps be constrained by other things? Maybe there'll be internal disruption to China's politics if it cannot manage to, for example, maintain the current political stability. That could disrupt China's political rise. And finally, there's the question of the rest of the world, because between them, China and the US are not the whole world economy. Other major powers will have a say in this. And at the moment, it looks like most of the other major powers of the world, Japan, the European Union, are closer to the United States than to China. So there's a question whether China, even as the world's largest economy, can become the dominant political power without allies.
I think economic growth, the success or failure of it will be determined by the degree to which individual countries and regions can supply jobs for the great emerging middle classes of these countries, formerly poor countries. I think what we're likely to see in the 21st century is many people who are either liberated from hard labor or for whom there is too little hard labor to provide jobs. And what will these people do? How will
of my talk is if robotics and artificial intelligence and the upcoming industrial revolution are a threat or an opportunity for the world and for manufacturing countries and also for developing countries. And the answer is still unknown, but what is sure now is that we have to invest in the main assets that are characterizing the industrial revolution, the digital transformation, competences, infrastructures, data centers, and all the tools that are fundamental and are considered enabling technologies for the future digital transformation. I also presented the differences between the US, Europe, and China, how they are integrating artificial intelligence into different knowledge and competences and scientific results. For example, in the US, they are investing very much in developing artificial intelligence for humanities, while in China they are investing in developing artificial intelligence for agricultural application, for producing food, for example. So globalization has obtained some results in terms of being socially connected, but in terms of geopolitics we still see many differences also in how the digital transformation is implemented in the society. Then I spoke about robotics and how the journey of robotics is coming into us, because robotics was developed for manufacturing countries, for industrial production, and robots are in manufacturing plants. But in recent years what we have seen is the development of service robotics, which is intended to support services and the offer of services in terms of medical robotics, social robotics, educational robotics. And now what is happening is that robotics is coming into our houses by producing some consumer products and also producing changes in the society in some of supporting autonomous drive or different products that are revolutionizing business and revolutionizing our life.
よろしいことが終わった。
We do have a very serious problem of people left behind. The global agenda talks about eradicating poverty, eradicating hunger, having every child in primary and secondary education. We're off track to achieve these things. And that means not just a few people left behind, it means literally hundreds of millions of people missing out. Take education. More than 250 million children, adolescents and youth not in school as we speak. How can those children and youth of the future really contribute to a knowledge economy if denied the most basic access to education? So it is time for the international community to get a grip on the reality of what is happening. If we want a world that is well fed, where people don't live in extreme poverty, where education is a right, not a privilege, we have a lot to do. International development assistance is important, critical for the lowest income countries. For other countries to be prioritising their budget so that their growth is inclusive and sustainable is critical. There are solutions. What's needed is the political will to activate and implement those solutions.
There are more than 70 million people in the world that are forcibly displaced from their homes, either as refugees crossing borders or displaced in their own country because of war, violence, discrimination, persecution, bad governance. Why is that? The world has become a difficult place where to make peace. We have become unable to make peace and to build peace. So that's the first thing that we need to look at if we want to reduce this global refugee crisis. Meanwhile, what is very important to remember is that 85% of those
those 70 million people are not in the rich world. They are in poor countries or middle-income countries. So the effort, and the new effort, not just humanitarian, but medium, long-term effort, founded on sound development, both for refugees and for host communities, has to focus on those countries. We have now a global compact on refugees. We will have the first ever global refugee forum in December this year in Geneva. These are opportunity to rally broader coalitions of actors, not just states and the United Nations, but also the private sector, the business community, civil society, academia, to forge new ways to respond to the global refugee crisis and to finally address strategically its root causes.
The question that you're raising, will Syria find a long-lasting peace? Well, the Syrian people deserve a long-lasting peace. Think about it. They've been 8 years now in a horrible conflict which became from local, regional, and frankly international. So the answer is it must be yes. Now, how to do it is where the challenge is coming. And the only way to do it is actually to end the military conflict, because there is no solution. It's not just a word, it's the truth. There will never be just a military solution, and include everyone. New constitution, elections under the UN supervision, that would be a way to include them.
Well, I'm delighted to be able tonight to address the members of the trilaterals and their guests. And I think my focus will be tonight on three things. One is, multilateralism has been the bread and butter of many of us, certainly at the IMF, and we believe that it has been critical in order to address many of the potential disorders of the world. Multilateralism is under threat at the moment, and I think that we have to make every effort to rejuvenate it, adapt it, and make sure that it continues to help govern, particularly the economic developments around the world. That's message number one. My second message will have to do with the much more longer-term consequences of short-term policies and mechanisms, and that is really the consequences of climate change. I believe that many of the issues that we are debating at the moment will mean absolutely nothing in 20 years' time if we have not acted now in order to make sure that the planet remains something that is hospitable for our children and grandchildren. And my third message, which will not surprise any of those who know me or my friends, will have to do with inequality, and in particular the inequality that women have to suffer and have had to suffer for a long time. And while inequality as such is a major disruption, I believe that by addressing women's situation and the inequality that they face, it will help quite a way in reducing inequalities. So we'll try to do that tonight.
We're living through an era of rapid and disruptive change. That's across the board, economy, society, and what we're seeing is that nowhere is that disruption more evident than the trends associated with climate change. We're all familiar with the extreme events, the temperature rises, and the inexorable change that we're seeing to the planet's ecology as a result of climate change. But a major part of that discussion is how does energy transition and decarbonization of our energy system, which accounts for about 2/3 of carbon emissions, how will that impact climate change, and can we enter an energy transition era rapidly enough to mitigate carbon that will take us to a safe future? This is already happening. Renewable energy today is cost competitive on the grid. In a few years, renewable energy has reached 33% of capacity of global power generation. It's the fastest growing segment, and costs are decreasing rapidly. So what we're going to see is a rapid move also going to be disruptive for the business models of today. It's going to imply new geostrategic relationships among countries as countries move away from resource-dependent fossil fuel-based systems into clean energy systems, and the resource is going to become technology, and technology innovation is going to decide the winners and losers in this race.
The challenge of dealing with disinformation narrative is that it's not enough just to check the facts, because by definition, any disinformation narrative doesn't have good facts. They make their facts up. They're actually lying. This is why it's disinformation. So the challenge with disinformation actors is that the thing they have in common is they're really good storytellers. They tell a story that people want to believe. A lot of the time they will appeal to anger, they'll appeal to fear, they'll appeal to hatred, and they will try and stop people thinking. They'll try and get people so enraged that they switch off their critical faculty. That means that for those of us who are trying to challenge these narratives on a daily basis, it's a much more complex challenge than just presenting the facts. You have to have the ability to tell the story, and you have to find an emotion to appeal to, which will actually get people to think. Now, fortunately, there is a model of story which works. If you think of the detective story, that's a story where you're putting together evidence and you're telling people, this is what happened, this is why it happened. And it appeals to a different sort of emotion. It appeals to curiosity, it appeals to problem solving. And so a lot of the challenge of dealing with disinformation is presenting the story of how the disinformation was created. How was the trick done? And you can lead people with the story, and you can show them, this person is telling you that here is a video of somebody attacking a voter at a polling station yesterday, but actually look, this video showed up on CNN 4 years ago in a different context. You can share that voyage of discovery with the person you're talking with, and then they will realize how the trick was done, but it will also sensitize them that the next time around, they'll be looking for that same trick. If you teach people very simple skills like searching for a photo online or searching for a video online, you can actually make them proof against that kind of reused content, repackaged content, not just today, but every time this kind of thing comes up. And so really dealing with disinformation, you have to have the facts, but you have to teach the skills as well. You have to give people the ability to solve the problems for themselves, because then you'll be appealing to their curiosity. You'll be appealing to their problem-solving senses, and you'll be appealing to their sense of pride in actually exposing the story in the first place. And those are the kind of emotions which will then counter the anger and the fear and the hatred that disinformation actors try to target.
Cities are one of the greatest innovations of all times, and what's interesting right now is that urbanization is, alongside with digitalization, a very, very strong economic force and force for innovation. As more and more people move into cities and metro areas, and urban areas were important during the industrial era, but they are increasingly important in a knowledge-based economy. And what's interesting, especially for a person like me who comes from a small city like Stockholm, is that there seemed to be room for cities outside the megacities as well. There are some really interesting drivers of innovation that are smaller or mid-sized cities, amongst which Stockholm is actually one, but there are a number of examples. And what is important if a city wants to become an outlier or a hub for innovation is collaboration. If you look at urban innovation especially, you need to have strong public-private partnership. The mayor needs to gather people from private sector, from academia and other stakeholders around the table and work together to solve problems. And I think We see that to a quite large extent right now, and I hope we'll see more of it going forward.
So we had, I have to say, a global meeting with three North American, Asian Pacific, and European members of the Trilateral Commission, which was very, very multidimensional, if I may. Multidimensional in the great tradition of the Trilateral Commission by the, I would say, experiences of the members, by the sensitivities of the members, by the fact that it was, of course, a non-partisan, multi-sensitivities meeting, also because the issues that we addressed were very, very multidimensional in all respect. We addressed issues that were of a geostrategic nature, issues that were of an economic nature, profoundly economic nature, issues that were related to environmental issues and difficulties and challenges. And we addressed also these particular challenges for our societies that populism, so-called populism, represent, which is also a largely multidimensional issue. So I think it was really a trilateral at its best. Also, it was the occasion to confirm some dimensions and orientations of the trilateral and to make new experience, to reinforce in a number of domains our, I would say, franchise as the Trilateral Commission. First, let me mention that the Trilateral is called Trilateral because there is not only the new hemisphere, the US, Mexico, Canada, but also Europe and also Asia. And of course, the role of Asia at a global level is more and more important. As regards new dimension for the Trilateral Commission, not only we confirmed our own values, democratic values, rule of law, human rights, and all what goes with a democratic society, but we also reinforce and confirmed our values as regards multilateralism, international cooperation, in the best sense of the term. We also said that we would like to be more transparent than we were before at the level of the Trilateral as a whole, with a new initiative that we took, in particular the idea of having the display of video to sum up some of the issues that we would have addressed, and also with the idea of making known at the level of the Trilateral Commission all publications, articles, interventions, books that would be displayed or published by the members of the Trilateral Commission. All this, of course, as part of transparency and also as part of being more influential if it is possible. We also have given a mandate to the three chairs to see in which direction we could be more proactive in terms of communication, display of our ideas through various forms. So this is something which we considered very important and is one of the major conclusions of the Trilateral Commission, which took place in Paris.
Sullivan. I am the new chair of the North America group of the Trilateral Commission. I wanted to take this opportunity to say a few words about the Commission and about our future. As you may know, the Trilateral Commission is a storied institution, an organization with 46 years of history of having an impact on big ideas, on bringing people together across different sectors and across three different geographies, that of North America, Europe, and Asia. But we are on the cusp of a new chapter, one that builds on that history, but really reorients ourselves and puts us in a position to make an impact in a very, very different world. And the reason why I have such confidence that the Commission can remake itself is because there is a need and the Commission is well suited to meet that need. And that need is quite simply that in this day and age, in these political landscapes, the need is simply for more organizations, more individuals, more entities to take up the mantle of defending a rules-based order, an order that values and is committed to democratic principles, ideas like free trade and human rights. And we also have a need for more ideas to help us tackle new challenges, or certainly challenges that are new to this generation. And there are many reasons why I think the Trilateral Organization is so well poised to meet this need. First and foremost, we are an organization that at its heart is a community of countries that share a common set of values, that share these commitments to these ideas about democracy, about free markets, about the rule of law. And secondly, we have a membership that spans policy, business, and academia and media. And that allows us to bring minds together in experience to bear on problems that are no longer just the purview of one of those sectors. The things that need to be thought about today and where we need new solutions and prescriptions are ones that are at the intersection of business and policy. Whether it is the contributions that private sector organizations can make to combating climate change, whether it is figuring out the ideas that will drive the reform of capitalism, or whether it is understanding the impact of technology on our systems, all of these things need business, government, and others at the table to help with. Now, of course, to realize this potential for the Trilateral Organization to meet this need, we are going to have to do some things differently than we have in the past. First and foremost, we are going to have to recognize, as a group primarily of democracies, we need to spend some time looking at ourselves, looking internally, saying what's happening with our own institutions, what is the health of our own institutions, and how is that situation affecting our ability to cooperate across national lines and deliver global problems to pressing global solutions. So we're spending more time talking about things like populism and the impact of technology on our own societies. Secondly, we've got to think about impact differently. Traditionally, we're an organization that has had impact based on the very nature of our relationships. We're an organization of people who have close ties to national governments, and often the ideas that we debate in private inform our own perspectives and inform our discussions and deliberations and conversations with people in positions of power. That will still be true, but today we need to think about having an impact on the broader debate. We no longer live in a world where governments are the only ones that can influence the future. In fact, increasingly, we have to think about other entities as being the real engines of change, and be that corporations or universities or even individuals. We need to think about how to shape the conversation, how to bring those groups in, to have investment in and commitment to solutions, and we need to move ahead whether or not we're able to get our governments to agree with our prescriptions and recommendations. So in short, it's a really exciting time to be part of the Trilateral Commission. I'm deeply honored to be the new chair of the North America Group, and I look forward to working with all our members and my colleagues from other regions to realize this vision. Thank you.
The role of political parties in the political processes of countries has been always to A, intermediate the demands of society, and second, to organize the process of political competition to mobilize the population for access to power. The first objective, the one of intermediation, has been badly eroded by technology, by the social media, because people have direct access to the politicians, to society in general, to make their demands directly to the people. However, nothing has replaced the means to access to power. And the problem that societies in the world all over are facing these days have to do essentially with the fact that governments have been unable to perform well. So I believe that the real problem is not political parties, but the lack of ability of governments to deliver in poor conditions. The governments have been unable to deliver for very obvious reasons. First of all, because it's much more difficult to govern in the era of ubiquitous information, because governments no longer have control of the sources of information, because they compete for information and for communications with the people in general. So the real problem is not political parties. The real problem is that societies in the world are lacking legitimacy. It's interesting to watch that there are a few governments in the world that know how to govern and have succeeded in maintaining the legitimacy of their systems. And in those countries, the political parties are not losing faith. So the real issue for the looking forward is to create conditions for the people to have access to the political process without undermining the legitimacy of those societies. And that's not something easy to accomplish. It'll take a dramatic effort of leadership, but not necessarily from politicians. It will take an enormous effort of society and the people to be able to create new forms of participation within which the political parties will always be important. The political parties, however, are fragmenting, are responding to the issue, the reality of fragmentation of societies, and they are not likely to be the ones to lead this process. One ought to look only at the election in the United Kingdom a few weeks ago to realize that this is likely what is likely to happen. There, the Brexit party, which is not looking for power, it's just looking for an issue, was the one who succeeded. So the citizens around the world are going to have to be much more responsible in creating conditions for accessing power and for making it possible for stability and legitimacy to be accomplished.
The best way for companies to surf the digital revolution is to build trust with their customers and to build trust with their employees. One of the ways in which companies can do that is to have frank conversations with the workforce, to sit down with workers and their unions and to say, look, here's the challenges that we're facing, but importantly to ask them, how can we best get there? Because all too often, a lot of the solutions that a company can put in place that will make a real difference, the employees know the answer to that.
Multilateralism is not only the best, in many cases the only way in which you can deal with global issues, because we're dealing with global challenges and therefore you need global solutions. You need multilateral solutions. They take a little longer, yes, of course, but once you get it, then they will stick around for longer and you will get greater ownership, and therefore you will tend to have more effective solutions. The other way is that, of course, unilateralism is always about who is stronger in a bilateral relationship. And therefore, by going multilateral, what you do is you balance, and all the opinions count. Of course, you always have the bigger countries speak louder, but the differences are less, and also the needs of the smaller countries, the needs of the developing countries, the needs of the groups in a society that are left behind, then they are much better addressed by a multilateral approach. So yes, today we need multilateral more than ever before.
We have just concluded the meeting here in Stockholm of the European section of the Trilateral Commission. I think it's been a great meeting. I think we've been able to have a dialogue on a lot of the issues that are of concern to all of us. Where are we going on the climate issues? How is the digital transformation going? What is the security really going to look like in the digital world? Where is Russia heading? What are the Americans up to? What will be the consequences of Brexit? So virtually all of the issues that are topic of concern to us Europeans at the moment have been on the agenda during these particular 2 days in Stockholm. And then I think we have also been enjoying the company of this very diverse and very interesting and increasingly young group that is the Trilateral Commission Europe.
I suppose the question we're all asking is, will the Brexit saga ever end? After 3 years after the referendum, and the British still haven't decided what they want to do, and they're now in an election. I suppose that the answer to the question depends on who wins the election. In order to try and answer that question, you have David Liddington, who was Mrs. May's number 2 in the last government, and who chose not to serve under Mr. Johnson, the current Prime Minister, and he's going to tell us who's going to win the election and whether that's going to bring things to an end. And I'm going to disagree with whatever he says.
Technology is not a threat to democracy. I believe that technology can enable our democratic principles of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and really freedom of information so that we can make smart decisions about how and where we want to take the future of our countries. I think we have to be mindful of how the technology can be used against us and educate our citizens about those risks. But I think that technology truly is an enabler of our society and that we should continue to embrace it, not refrain from it.
To some extent, the school of the future for the adult workforce will essentially not be a school. Many people will have to continue to learn, continue to reskill, continue to upskill, but they'll do that inside their workplace. We will need to ensure that at least 2 to 3 months of learning are integrated into every single year that somebody is at work. The second thing that we know is that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is changing workplaces and the needs of the labor force so quickly that we're also going to need to quite fundamentally reform education systems. And that applies to the delivery and it also applies to the content. One, we need much more technology integrated into schools. And second, we need to ensure that young children are understanding how to apply these technologies in the future, understanding how to collaborate with each other rather than compete with each other, and understand how to apply critical thinking so that they're able to continue to learn throughout their life course.
So many unicorns up here in Nordic countries, and I think especially if you look at Sweden and Finland, Estonia of course in a class of its own. I think that it starts with fantastic education. We really have a foundation of education here in Nordic countries that doesn't kill initiative, doesn't kill creativity, and of course that is what it takes to be an entrepreneur. You need creativity, you need to be able to take initiative. So I think that's something that is really enabling this whole thing here up in the north. And then of course we have fantastic catalysts, events like Slush that are very, very different from anywhere else in the world. We actually let our young people take charge. So if you look at Slush, you know, it happens every year in Helsinki in Finland. And when you come to this part of the world, you know, be it Stockholm, Helsinki, Tallinn, it's definitely going to be cold, dark, there's going to be slush on the ground. So it's very clear that it's not the Silicon Valley. It's much, much better. And it's much, much better because it's different. We have 2,400 volunteers from more than 60 countries that build this fantastic event called Slush. And it's really the young people, they're volunteering, they're there doing and making that happen
because they want to be there, they love to be there, not because somebody told them that, please do this, please do that, but they're there because they want to be entrepreneurs, they want to make things happen. And they build this event for a few years, the best and biggest on the planet, and after that they go off and they build fantastic startups. So I think that the whole Nordic model is about enabling people to do things and giving the people, the young people and all of us the skills needed to be successful. We also have a fantastic safety net, so we all know that when you try to do new things, more often than not, you fail. And what do you do then? Hopefully you don't end up in the streets, and dying, but actually you try again. And I think that here in the Nordic countries, it's fantastic to be an entrepreneur because you're not, if you fail, you're not going to find yourself without a roof over, your head, but you're actually, you have a safety net. You can go out there and you can try again and again, and before you know it, you build your first unicorn, and after that, hopefully go and build the next one. So I think that is one reason why we have the highest density of unicorns anywhere on the planet here in Nordic countries, and of course our friends in Estonia are really in a league of their own in this. 1.3 million people, and they have 4 unicorns: Playtex, Skype, TransferWise, and now the latest one being Bolt. 1.3 million people, 4 unicorns, that's more than 10% of all the unicorns in Europe actually. So the rest of Europe needs to get its act together. And then I think that if you look at this unicorn per capita, in China they have more unicorns than anywhere else, 200, but they also have more people, 1.4 billion people. So if you do the math, in China you need 7 million Chinese people to build just one unicorn company, while in Estonia they are much more efficient, only roughly 3,000 people you need to build one unicorn. So that's actually quite exceptional. So I think that we should all be more like Estonia, and that's something that we can definitely strive to here in Europe. So let's go out there and do things, and we'll end up with lots of new unicorns all over Europe.
For us in the European Roundtable, which gathers the 55 largest companies, most important companies in Europe, Europe's competitiveness is absolutely key. The world is changing. We see lesser of continued work for free trade, more protectionism growing in both East and West. And we as companies, we realize that we will not be long-term successful unless Europe is successful. And there are a few challenges that really stick out here. First, it's digitalization. The world is becoming digital through artificial intelligence and through the rollouts of 5G. This opens up for huge opportunities in every single part of society. But Europe is lagging behind here. We need to speed up there. We need to invest more, do more. Then we have the Green Deal. Europe is in the lead in this. And this is an area where we can take advantage of business opportunities, and it's important, of course, for the planet. So that's an area where we also have to come together. And then, of course, we are believers in free trade or free trade under agreed rules, and this is now a threat, and we need to stand up for it. But also, we need to be realistic and make sure that we navigate this new landscape in an effective way.
So I am a complete believer of public policy and the power that it can have in moving the market. I believe in strong states that can send the correct signals to markets to move in the direction we want. What states can do is actually to promote the good and tax the bad. And states are there to promote the greatest public good. I have experiences in many, many parts of the world where bold and clever public policy has actually ramped up industrial competitiveness and the growth of markets, in particular renewable energy markets. I can state the case of Latin America, of several Latin American countries. For example, in the case of Mexico, in the past few decades, bold policy in giving a clear vision as well as renewable energy targets and leaving the markets to set up the prices was and drove the lowest solar price for renewable energy in the world in 2017. You can count that example and many other examples where bold public policy has actually catalyzed an industrial revolution for the good. We are in a moment of a planetary emergency. We are both in a nature crisis as well as in a climate crisis, and if the states don't raise up their bar and put strong policies in place, it's going to be difficult that we get where we want to get. Businesses are waiting, progressive businesses are waiting, but if we don't have a common playing ground, it's going to be difficult for us to ramp up the mass of the businesses and non-state actors that are ready to act.
Well, on the one hand, the European Union is very well equipped. We have been doing quite a lot of trade agreements in the world the last years. In the European Union, the Commission negotiates on behalf of 28 member countries, which gives us a big strength. We just concluded agreements with Canada, with Japan, with Singapore, with Mexico, and others are in negotiations. But of course, with the changing climate, with countries not respecting WTO rules, countries going increasingly bilateral, there is a challenge there. So we are looking at how to reform our policies, of course, to be still able to do trade agreements, to strengthen the WTO and reform it with other like-minded countries, but also to protect ourselves against countries who are not playing according to the rules, and to make sure that the European the level playing field is respected. We have changed our trade defense mechanisms. We have implemented a coordination mechanism for investment screening, and we are looking at how to sharpen our tools. And this will be a key issue for the new Commission coming in as well.
When will it all end? Brexit. I think the truthful answer is that we will know with the general election on the 12th of December the time to complete the first chapter. Either Boris Johnson will win, in which case Britain will exit the European Union on or about the end of January 2020, or alternatively, if there is a majority for the opposition parties combined, then there will be a second referendum in the middle of next year. But the trouble is, neither of those outcomes is going to settle things definitively, because a second referendum, it might well lead to a narrow vote to remain in the EU, but that would not end the division in the United Kingdom. And of course, if Mr. Johnson wins his majority, then we've got to negotiate the new relationship on trade, on security, on foreign policy cooperation between the United Kingdom, which will remain a big European power, a major player in defence and security and economic terms, but it's going to be next door to the European Union. Those 27 countries are going to be my country's most important trading partner, our closest geographical democratic neighbours for as far ahead as I can possibly see. So working that through is going to take, I fear, a year, more than a year, I would estimate. And I think there's a real responsibility both on UK political leaders but also on EU political leaders to get this right. European democracy is under massive strain from Russian aggression, from a dramatic economic change that is adding to public mistrust in the way in which we do business. So getting the geopolitics right, having a constructive future relationship between the UK and our neighbours in the EU 27 is important for the whole of the European democratic community.
Gamification and game-based learning indeed is the future of lifelong learning. I believe that because as we train the new generations of in the workforce, we know that we need to create materials that are a lot more engaging, that are a lot more useful, and that are going to have an impact in the way that they learn and in the way that they acquire the new skills that they need in order to remain competitive in the marketplace. What a better way to do that than through video games? As children, we learn through playing, and we believe that through gamification and through game-based learning, we can make learning fun again, not only for children, which we know is the best way to learn, but also from adults. If they play these video games, they will become more engaged, as I said earlier. They will also acquire that knowledge much more deeply, and they will be able to apply that knowledge in their daily jobs. And finally, by doing the video games through the simulators, they will be able to have experiential learning to get the feedback on what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, and learn from that.
Very clearly, I think the world is moving towards a secular economy. It's a necessity. When you look at water scarcity, when you look at waste pollution, everybody is now aware of that. If we want to make a conciliation between the planet for our children and economic development, we need to move towards a secular economy, and by education, by innovation, by a different way of doing business, both for citizens and also by companies, we will make this move, which will help us collectively to have a planet great again. Thank you.
Of entertainment in the 21st century is going to be shaped by the twin forces of globalization and digitalization, both of which are going to be terrific for consumers. Digitalization means that people will be able to consume entertainment wherever and whenever they want, and globalization means that that opportunity will be given to people around the globe. While there's some concern that large companies are going to dominate the future of the entertainment landscape, I actually have a different view, because I feel that digitalization is very empowering to creators. And when you think about a phenomenon like YouTube and user-generated consumption, these are powerful, powerful forces. Similarly, digitalization has allowed the falling of distribution barriers. So not only is production much easier, but the ability to distribute it to people is much easier. And we're really living in a golden age of entertainment with many more choices than we have. And that also means a greater democratization of ideas. And again, all of this is happening on a global scale, which is really enabled by digital technology.
What is actually the biggest threat from cybersecurity for Europe? Of course, we can concentrate and focus on the security side, but I would take it a bit on the other side, that if we really go to focus too much on the security side, then it really will slow down our development. I think it is the biggest threat is that we lose competitiveness. And that is for me the whole part, because if we want to be leaders in innovation, we should also know innovation, it has two aspects. First, I think you must have a great idea, but you must be the first. So that means speed. And we must make sure that I think we have an ability to be innovative and to be the first and to have speed. So for me, that is the biggest threat of cybersecurity, to get it slowed down.
So are we suffering from eco-anxiety? The simple answer is yes, possibly too much. Eco-anxiety is definitely triggered by the fact that we are facing a very urgent matter with climate, but at the same time, it's also because we're facing something that is very complex. It's very difficult to understand the impact of climate change, and it's very difficult to understand the solutions to reach a low-carbon economy. So in the world of investment where I am, what I see is those who are actually acting every day to invest in climate change investments and low-carbon economy investments are actually less susceptible to eco-anxiety because they can see the result and the impact of what they do. But really what is needed to decrease this anxiety is more examples of impactful investment, change of behavior in society that would actually bring people to less anxiety.
Been in a situation where U.S. and West European support for Ukraine was very well coordinated, and we were maintaining a consistent pressure on Russia to begin to negotiate seriously about ending its occupation of eastern Ukraine. Unfortunately, I think now the impeachment dynamics in the U.S. have really knocked U.S. policy off the table. We don't have the people, we don't have the engagement, we don't have the same focus. And as a result, I think that takes a lot of the pressure off of Russia to negotiate. I'm hopeful that as we have a Normandy format summit, possibly on December 9th, it may take a little bit longer, that can retain some of that negotiating dynamic. But I'm afraid that right now the situation is much more difficult for Ukraine than it should be.
The role of civil society in modern Russia? I would say it's a very important issue. Why? Because in Russia, political competition is limited, there are no real opposition parties, so the society stands up to the autocratic regime through organizing itself, through building trust, through providing public goods that a corrupt and inefficient state cannot provide. And it's not just protesting corruption, it's not just about asking for democracy and rule of law. Civil society today is working on helping the poor, helping the disadvantaged, fighting domestic violence, promoting gender equality, defending minorities. So this is actually where the European future for Russia is. And luckily, with the new communication technology, with internet, it's easier to organize itself, it's easier to inform itself, and it's easier to promote change, creating new Russia that eventually will become part of Greater Europe.
At a time when 1,000 NATO troops are stationed at the border between Estonia and Russia to deter possible Russian aggression, when President Macron is speaking about what he calls cercle concentrique, when citizens in Moldova and Georgia are questioning whether Europe and the US will come to rescue if there is is a security guarantee. And when sanctions against Russia and counter embargoes have become kind of the very essence of the idea of a European security policy, well, what can we expect from Russia? We know that Putin is actually more popular than most of his competitors. But will Medvedev be a different leader than Putin? In short, can we expect a different kind of trajectory from Russia in the coming years when the bureaucratic elite inside Russia is focusing more on digitalization than what some might call modernization? As always, the views on Russia are diverging.
Developments in these last few years are showing us that the strength of the EU relative to individual countries is not constant over time. I believe we can say that the EU is strongest towards candidate countries. When a country wishes to accede to the European Union or to the Eurozone, it tends to follow the suggestions and the prescriptions of the EU as much as possible to make progress. And that is the moment when the magnet effect of European integration is really great, and by the way has induced countries in the past, if we think of the Balkans for example, also to establishing better relations among each other in order to qualify for membership of the EU. Then the problem is that sometimes relative vis-à-vis member states, the EU is not so strong in terms of leading them to respect its own rules as pro-Europeans would like to see. And we can even see in recent years, for example, a greater leniency in terms of allowing infringements of the Stability and Growth Pact. But then the most recent experience is how difficult it is for a country to leave the European Union if it so decides. And the monumental example of Brexit shows us that vis-à-vis a member state which wants to leave the European Union still has quite a remarkable power. We have seen in the case of the negotiations on Brexit the EU displaying really unexpected unity among the 27, also thanks to the skills and determination of chief negotiator Michel Barnier. And we are seeing how difficult it is for the UK to get its act together. And this, in my view, should be also kept in mind by countries here and there where governments play with the idea of perhaps leaving one day the EU or the Eurozone. They better keep in mind that it is tremendously difficult. If it is proving to be so difficult for a country of the standing, the experience, the administration of the quality of the UK, I don't want to imagine other specific examples of countries where the politicians sometimes say, let's get rid of the EU. Not only I have no idea where those countries would end up, but also they would suffer very, very much in the process.
When one thinks mix about the 2015 migration crisis. It is true that we have gone a long way as a European continent. And we've gone a long way because in 2015 we were hit with a massive crisis. Hundreds of thousands of migrants coming to Europe's shores. And that is not the case anymore. It is true that the overall numbers have decreased. But is that enough? Is it enough to just look at the overall numbers? Or should one also focus on what's happening within each EU country? And I say that because there are certain EU countries, such as Greece, such as Italy, such as Spain, which have taken a far greater hit than others when it comes to migration crisis. And yes, the numbers are overall down, but problems do persist in countries like the ones I just mentioned. So the question one needs to ask is, has Europe done enough in order to alleviate the effects of the crisis throughout the entire EU 28? Has Europe done enough in order to share burdens? And I say that particularly because when one looks at the figures regarding relocation of refugees across Europe, then one will realize that not enough has been done in that direction. And so one is led to the question, what kind of Europe do we want? Do we want a Europe where we all share the benefits of Europe, or do we also want a Europe where countries also share burdens?
Now it is the end of the Ljubljana meeting, which was a great meeting. We have had excellent discussions, we have learned a lot, and we have thought a lot. And now I hope to see you in Paris next June. It will be a plenary session, and all of us, we shall be there. So please do come to Paris.
Does the European Union need its own army? Well, here's what I think. The vision of a European army is actually a useful vision because it is good to know what the long-term goal might be. But is the European army something we can put together right now? No. And why not? First and foremost, because the European Union does not even have the mechanism to come up with clear political decisions and to speak with one voice in crisis. So the first step which we in the European Union need to take together is to change our decision-making process. We need to go from consensus to qualified majority voting. We need to learn that all of us, whether we are 27 or 28, will only be listened to, will only be respected, and can only be a military actor in the world if we speak with one voice. And that requires majority voting. So that's step number one. And the next steps are capabilities, and we will need to work on that also. And then we can think of the long-term vision of a European army.
So I'm Jane Harmon, and the question is, what is the future of political parties? I can speak to the U.S. more than anywhere else. I was a member of our Congress for 9 terms and left because it became so partisan and dysfunctional. At the Wilson Center, we study this, and there are some remedies to the problems. But bottom line, in the U.S., our tradition is 2 parties only. In Europe, there are multi-party systems in most countries, and we're seeing the rise of populist parties. In the U.S., we have no populist party. We have a Republican Party that is now dominated by our president, and we have a Democratic Party where most of the noise is coming from the far left. What we don't have is anything to represent the center. And that is the challenge for the U.S. going forward. That is something I work on, and that is something that the Wilson Center is hoping to improve. Because if we are to convey at least a majority view in the United States, essential to making our foreign policy and domestic policy effective, we need to reach for the center so that we have both parties participating. And hopefully we'll advance that goal here at the Trilateral Commission.
So we had a marvelous meeting in Stockholm. We could address all the issues that are of very great importance for the European and also at the global level. It was marvelously organized by the host of the Swedish chapter, and we appreciated enormously their organization. All the panelists were very, very stimulating and interesting. Many provisional conclusions are coming from this meeting, including the fact that the European wants to be more assertive perhaps than they were before in many domains, including the digitalization, the platform at a global level, including industry and research and services at a global level. This idea that Europe as a whole should be again more present in the global conversation came very much out of this meeting, which was again very comprehensive and stimulating. But you will see that in the various video perhaps that you would like to see. Now I have to give you a new rendezvous. We have rendezvous in Washington.
大特価会のメズ。もしかして大人気喧嘩して警察沙汰になったらやっぱ逮捕されたからね。喧嘩したからね。やっぱり喧嘩したか。喧嘩してたか。びっくりした。ああ、言いにくくなったと。あら、サタイ委員長がそうですか。以外に言った。うん。大丈夫です。サタイ委員長でした。うん、多分あのニュースでも知ってましたよ。やっぱりね。俺もやっぱりな、こそぎ非公開だ。ああ。スタッフが来たいな。皆さん知っているからね。うん。
I think that the relations between Russia and the European Union are in the stalemate right now. There has been no major movement in either direction since the European Union accepted the so-called five Federico-Mogherini principles almost 4 years ago. Both sides apparently believe that time is playing on their side and they can sit on their hands waiting for something to change. However, I think that on both sides we see more and more fatigue and more intention to start gradually rebuilding this relationship. I do hope that if the Normandy summit in France turns out to be moderately successful, we might see new openings because, of course, Ukraine remains the major stumbling block on the way to better relations between Moscow and Brussels. If we're able to create at least some positive dynamics there, it would be easy to proceed on other issues where Russia and the European Union have common interests.
名前の親子の子出してるのは出してるからね。やーって皆川会作った方ですね。まあ俺もこの優勝やぶだけど無理やからね。戻る。うん。I
don't think anyone wins in trade conflicts, and even the word wars are, I think, a bit overstated because wars end up being zero-sum. One wins, one loses. And in the case of trade, it should be a win-win operation. So I think the analogy is mistaken, and by closing off your own markets, you increase costs to your own people. In the United States, about 50% of imports are for commodities or intermediate goods, so if you raise those costs, you raise costs for manufacturers and consumers in the United States, or same would be the case in Europe. And in the case of the U.S. and China, I think that we're in a very dangerous situation. I think that there are many reasons and frustrations with China. Some of them are justifiable about forced technology transfer, intellectual property rights, reciprocity. There's also concerns about Chinese security and other policies. But I think you can find allies within China on a number of the trade issues. And you actually want to try to keep pushing both sides to a rules-based system. So I think that the path that we're on with China has led to more of confrontation. And in fact, what you're probably going to need to see is some combination of competition, cooperation, and confrontation, or at least drawing lines on some issues. So I think with a country as big as China, you need a more multifaceted policy.
結構
I would say that the characteristics of a Nordic education system is that, first of all, we have a very inclusive system based on public funding where there should be a room for all. I think students are taught to think independently, a lot of critical thinking, and also quite a lot of creativity baked into our education. I would especially commend the Finnish system where they put their best teachers for the youngest students. And they use a lot of resources in preschool and also first to third grade to ensure that the children are best possibly equipped for future learning. And I believe that that's the best investment you can make, is to invest in the kids when they're really young, so you lay the foundation for their future learning.
皆さん、メーガン・オーサリバン、クルシチョフという裁判所、多分レティンガーの件に触れたよね。
We had a conversation yesterday in the dinner with Nigel Higgins on, I would say, the crisis, the causes of the great financial crisis, and whether or not we are in a situation where we could expect new major difficulty, taking into account what we have done since the crisis that erupted in 2007-2008. I have to say that the questions which were asked by Nigel were very, very stimulating. I could embark on explaining that, in my opinion, it was very much a multi-dimensional cause that we had to look with.
ただ、妙に目にしたのは、私は2020年に、労働団体や、アメリカメディアみんな宗教団とか、アメリカの国責任転嫁した。責任転嫁した。国民に、ある時代、ロシア大使館、修理部で、だで、なんで、ミャンマー系の外務省、だから、やっぱり JI にあげる。おかしい。おかしい。いや、これミャンマー大使館でいいの？実はね、これ、分かったよ。ミャンマー大使館。俺だったら対戦してるから。やっぱり対戦してたからね。してるから。逆に言うと赤坂ね、あそこら辺。カンボジアの国大使がやるやつ。いや、はい。無理やったね。やっぱ広いましょう。基本的に右翼嫌いやな。右翼いじめしちゃう。ようしたし。これはネオナチのもんだ。ネオナチのもんだよ。
But I stress that the two causes that I mentioned just now, namely these emerging properties and the rapidity of contagion on the one hand, and the debt overburdening the global economy
なんでここでこうなんか無関係だからね、別に俺は無関係だから。あれから四国、そう日本そう。
Piling up of debt more or less at the same pace after the crisis as before the crisis. And this is worrying, and it calls for extreme vigilance, obviously, and hard work to complete all what we have done and should do, again, to prevent the new crisis, and if we have new shocks that are very difficult to predict, to prove resilience in the new environment which we will have to accept because we have a recession in the US and in Europe, or because we have geostrategic events that would be very, very shocking at the global level, or for any other reason. That's what we discussed.
Sullivan. I'm the chair of the North American Trilateral Commission. I know we've got some more people filtering in, but I wanted to welcome you all and to say how excited I am for today's conversation. We're really lucky to be joined by Dan Jurgen, who is well known to this entire crowd, certainly a man who needs no introduction, and Halima Croft, who is also a real expert in her own right, and a new member to the Trilateral Commission. So we're joined by two of our own, and I would say that one of the best duos we could have to talk about energy and geopolitics. So Dan, as you know, I would consider him, or I think he is broadly considered, not just by me, but by the whole entourage of experts in this field. He is the energy guru, really the global expert on the intersection of energy and geopolitics. Someone who I have read and looked up to in my career as I have worked on this field, and a person who is always on the forefront of giving us analysis about this constantly changing dynamic, and one that I think the energy realm is probably underappreciated in terms of its impact on global politics. So Dan is well known for a trilogy now. The first of which is the prize, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize, and the second called The Quest, and the third is called The New Map. You'll see it right over his left shoulder there. It's a fabulous read, and I commend it to all of you. It is both comprehensive and incredibly interesting, cataloging not only history, but also talking about the energy transition, and that's what we're here to hear him talk about today, just about again,
ジンたち、フェイスブックあるやん。逆に言うとね、あれ、パイナップルやん、水あげて。あいつ来てるか覚えといて。求人。出たら。すぐバレるから、気をつけて。長橋来てる人やな。来来で来てたみたい。無事。最初は滋賀県長橋出身。
Dan, I could spend the next hour actually going through everything that you've accomplished, every book that you've written, and all of your fantastic analysis. But I wanted to get right into it. And so basically, Dan, the big question on my mind is, when I picked up the book, is what is the new map of energy, climate, and the clash of nations? I mean, how did you come up with this title? You go through all the different cartographers and their important impact on geopolitics. Like, what is the new map?
Thank you, Halima, and I'm very glad to be on with you. Great respect for your work and, of course, Megan's work in this area as well.
暴言電話の件はどうするんだ。憲法守れ、法律守れて。犯罪やぞ、お前ら。傷ついたんですよ、本当に。そんな暴言話したら終わりや。何やよ、今年のオールスターズ。選手減るわ。無理になってきたやん。みんなの友達からよう分かった。今にも原因あってん。全然あったことない、水は上に。詐欺あったやん。だから藤井とセックス旅行行きたいの。ハグットの発売で。全部俺に責任転嫁して。全然謝罪声明出してんよ、白けんは。自分たちの俺の拉致の幇助してんよ。全然聞いてない、謝罪声明。西川貴教かフォローされたことない。無関係なのよ、大丈夫かな。誰が長山署が言ってん。誰の言い方か言うて、暴言放ったから。お前ら、名誉毀損罪言ってるぞ。今は国内訴訟検討中や。宮内庁に対して。責任取れよ、お前ら。わかりました。暴言放って強制連行してんだ。日本先進主義学会をもう訴えてほしいよ。金井彦以降殺人罪で訴えようかと思ってるわ。今、厚生労働省解体要求の講習検討中や。こいつら関与するから。江ノ島には犯罪組織に関わってたってことだよね。まあちっとも反省しないじゃない。滋賀県とは無関係なの。これは分かりました。分かった。もう無関係だね。ほっとけ。あんな知名度アップにテロやってるよ。あら、報道しなくなって。多分なんかやめたよ。俺もやめた。これ以上だ。逮捕された。警視庁系で逮捕された。ビザのように逮捕された。わかりました。みんな教師ね。俺お職に手出してね。知ったから。お職に手出してね。日大事件でよう分かった。日大の人もあえて登場してよ。そんなもん。更新施設に関してね、スプートニクの皆さんが報道してくれてるんやぞ。あえてテロ組織、大尿検制とか報道してくれてるんですよ。写真の上に代弁したじゃん。知ってたら賛美し始めたから私の上にあえて活躍してるからね。 皆さんよ、山口組の幹部、釈放の場面は、あれは革命マルク先生の幹部も来てるで、どうすみんな交渉にっていうか、来てくれてる。そうだ。いや、なんかね、逆に、やっぱりな、あれで今警察沙汰になってるからか。
Well, now I want to turn to China, and to all the participants on the line, I will be opening it up in a few minutes for questions, and so if you can raise your hand or text the question, I have my glasses on, so I will try to start calling on everybody in a few minutes. But I want to turn to China, because China occupies such a central place in Europe, and you talk a lot about sort of the future of great power rivalry between the United States and China, and energy is such an important part of that story. And so I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about this. And you talk a lot about the Thucydides trap or you reference it in the book. Do you subscribe to that sort of thesis about potential for conflict?
I
wrote about to find actually very compelling, and there are too many echoes in pre-World War I here now. In Henry Kissinger's book on China, talks about that in the epilogue. That says, by definition, historical analogies are intact, but you certainly see a dramatic change, as most of the people on this call know. You know, 5 years ago there was a very different attitude towards China. 5 or 6 years today, one of the few things that unites Democrats and Republicans is this sense China is a strategic rival, great power competition, and the Chinese are using the same language. And I found I didn't expect to spend as much time looking at the nine-dash line in the South China Sea as I did. And of course my curiosity was, where did the nine-dash line come from? And actually from the French archives I found reports of the French captains who sailed 3 ships to fight the islands in the South China Sea in the 1930s, and then the Chinese reaction. And it was the Chinese geographer who in 1936 drew the nine-dash line basically, which the nationalists and the communists adopted. But it seems if you look at it, there's realities about that body of water through which traverses 1/3 of the world trade, through which passes the same number of oil tankers as go through the Strait of Hormuz every day. And the Chinese are very concerned about what's happening with Taiwan, with the U.S. Navy. So it's interesting with the China part of the book, it really was kind of also grounded in maps, the nine-dash line, and the map of the Belt and Road, the 6 maps of the Belt and Road initiative. And I wrote my first book on the origins of the Cold War, and I never expected to be writing another book where I talk about the origins of possible Cold Wars. But I think day by day, step by step, it seems to be moving in that direction. And just to add one other thing, it's striking before World War I, the technology that was the most crucial technology was battleships between Germany and Britain. And today, it's technology, but of course, the Huawei is in a sense the great symbol of this unexpected clash. I went back and looked at what previous presidents said about the relationship with China, how Bill Clinton said the most important economic initiative of his administration was bringing China to the WTO. You wouldn't find anybody talking about partnership with a changing China today, or in Washington, I think.
Sticking with China, I want to talk about, a big theme of your book is obviously on the climate challenge, and you have a great section on EVs. And the role that China plays in control of supply chains, the component parts for lithium batteries, how are we thinking about the geopolitics
trying to understand them in a very gradual way. I know Megan has written about kind of the thinking about geopolitics of renewables. And, I mean, until a few years ago, supply chains were about economics, were about technology, but now they're also increasingly about geopolitics and in many different ways we see that. And I think when you look at the numbers involved in seriously moving to net zero carbon,
わかりましたか？
talking about installing
絆連行詐欺の井上真理のお前やお前のせいで日本崩壊したんです安保闘争責任取れるのか吉田茂之氏のテロ行為なんでバーニープロダクションを作ったらさ弁償しようって形で決定したんやところがダメだああやってスプートニックさん系スプート賠償金支払いしてました報告し電通も被害受けたのいやでももう滋賀県と無関係なのほっとけいいの駅にあったやん昔もう調べてたわ
Okay, now again, I'm getting ready to turn it over to questions.
架空だけどそこの急にまだ死の時ねああ前原だったからねあったね四国中央境界
With the completion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project. I mean, I think it's almost 94% completed, and the United States is doubling down on efforts to block this pipeline. And you do spend a lot of time in your book talking about the long history of the U.S. to try to sort of break Russia's hold on European gas markets. Can you talk about why we're still doing this and sort of the economics of Russia right now? Like how are they positioned in this transition?
It's William, as you say, it is a long history. It's been about 70 years in which the U.S. has periodically tried to prevent Russian oil and then natural gas exports.
いやロシア大使館
There was a now long forgotten
捜査受けてたから
state of New York saying that the Soviets wanted to drown us in a sea of Russian oil, and that started during really the Kennedy administration. Some of the people on this call will certainly remember in the 1980s.
お前たち知ってるの安保闘争の時にソビエト大使館とかアメリカ大使館を襲われたのそれは証言や赤地特使とかね大統領アイゼンハワー将軍ねそうだよね全額で守ってくれたんやさで
Just yesterday, I heard one of the people in the administration saying, we want to prevent Russia from having leverage or stranglehold on European energy. Well, the numbers don't bear that out for two reasons. One is that the Europeans have made their gas system very flexible. And two, LNG, liquefied natural gas. The Europeans have choices, and the market is competitive. The prices have gone down, but it was so striking to me. When you sit down to write, you see how something happens over there and over there. President Trump signed the legislation last December, from Andrews Air Force Base that put the first sanctions in place. About that same time, just about 2 weeks earlier, a week earlier, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping in two different locations, one in Sochi, one in Beijing, and then were connected in a very elaborate ceremony to control stations on the Russian-Chinese border, and they pulled the switch on the Power of Siberia pipeline, massive pipeline, and to me it kind of it resonated that on the one hand, we want to block this, but and this Russian-Chinese relationship, which some people say, we can pry them apart. I don't think we can pry them apart in these circumstances.
Well, I want to follow on with that because I actually got to interview Brian Hook yesterday, and it was on the record, so I could talk about it. And I talked about your book, and I said to Brian, we talk about the Yamal LNG project, and that potentially does
いろいろや。もしもし会うんやったら弁償しろ。俺の口座に振り込め。賠償金として支払いしてや。これ分かったらみんながさ、もう無関係だって知ってんの。これ詐欺の被害者、責任転嫁させられたよ。滋賀県はもう無視しろ。ほっとけ。もういいんや。お互いに無関係だって知ってたよ。いやいや、俺に圧力かけたのか。その証拠に大阪危機起こっちゃえろ。埼玉ああなってもたよ。まあなと思った埼玉危機を起こして。自分たちはテロをやったんやぞ。大阪の危機。わかる？被害者の革命マルクス戦線だ。私の子たちです。被害者のね。だ。で、右翼団体問題よ。どっかの所属かなと思って調べた。で、たまたま全日本愛国者団体会議がさ、知ってた。調査してます。大丈夫だよ。私のこれ言ったのさ、右翼団体が参加してる。知ってますか？日本政府ちっとも右翼団体規制せんやん。ちょっと問題やん。そうばっかさせるやん、自分ら。確かに全然見ようやん。スプートにあえて報道してるやん。女性外人に流れてるで。忍ぶすけど招いたことやん。吉田資源の招いたことやん。どうやって知ってんの？知ってん。もうあの時点で日本から独立してたね。日本国際なんで。わかりました。上川君が知ってますよ。上川君が上川君は久保田健一、俺でした。俺が中佐。ようやく面会できます。面会できました。マッカーサーと面会できました。で、本当のことやね。あえてね、フィールドミーティングあっても、特に俺の日本語なんて全体のほんの 10% 未満しか取得してないよね。そんな意味で英語のやつは日本語でできるのが斉藤敦さん、山王大学、東京学芸大学、ご説明してくれないの。本当に説明してくれたよ。ザ・ジングルズ。知ってますよ、参考にしました。ちょっと長めな、こういう表記でした。調べてくれたよ。すごいな。全然聖書を見直し議論です。次自体いいんやけど、別に何があんのし、トライメント、木の元が危なかったら、いや、林君が戻されたの。 グレやったから今日大々でラーメン食いに行ったそれね。全然トマツあるかも凶暴者だ。グレやったからあいつら中島めぐみ来てたんじゃないかな。グレやったから。いや、聞かないが代表としてこい。もうこんな陽子はいい。お前は謝罪しに来い。ドキドキ言うてな。あんなテロやったんや。最多の危機とね、大崎危機招いといて。責任取れ。のんき美白連絡会議でかね。テロ会合やったんか。テロサイバーテロ推進会議やったんか。来たんか。どれあのプリキュア全部俺潰しやったか。まあ賛美してくれてありがとうね。逆にお返しやビルダーバーグ参加の世界傭兵連盟がお前らに対して戦争司会で気象兵器ぶっ放す。プリキュア雑魚やったら簡単に倒せた気象兵器。ああいうふうに竜巻使った人工竜巻兵器で戦争仕掛けました。分かったか。児玉行くことそう行こう。お前の命令やろ。アニブラクション脅したよしてると。お前首相にやったら、テロ組織に指定するからな。パワーニングと子会社のバーニングカルスグローンもねテロ組織に指定するからな。お前らのテロ行為や。最大後に最多の危機の件お前らに責任取らせるからな。この前と最多の知見最多の警察の解体の危機があった。責任取ってもらうからね。もうこの埼玉公民の事件なんて PMS、PIC 解禁しようかと思ってる。これ児玉機関解禁しようかと思ってる。解禁しようと思ってる。俺連絡会のメンツの若いね、もうこれいいやつかさ。司るようにね、IR、インテリジェンター、ウーラーで、司る試合、司しのぶですと。うん、しのぶ。ね。なんかみんな気づかなかった。英語で SOD とかさ、英語に AV が正解だった。ああ、うん。あみっちゃんがちょうどあみっちゃんのこっそりね。したね。言ってたのよ。びっくりした。びっくりした。ウェイね、ごめん、これ、井上のことや。私も時々英語とか言ってる。さあ、YouTube 配信しようと数歩食らってダメになったよ。俺、川崎市訴えたよ。逆に言うと松浦正飛のおかげや助かった。浜崎さんもう親が知ってる。大体安保闘争の時九州も被害受けてはずや。こんな言ったら今頃浜崎あゆみさん登場してなかったんやから。エイベックスとさ割れてなかったやつさ石上舞ちゃんもね知らなかったよ。薄見健二さんね天ぷらアクション誕生してなかったやつさだよな。麻生太郎さんだね死んでたはずやさ。死んでたんよ。死んでたんやぞ。まさかあの時麻生太郎さんの直系の金襲ったって言う噂あるの。終わりでなあんたさ。 ああ、デモ隊が守ってくれて。ああ、浜田来い。ああ。採決邪魔するな。さあ、だからよりさ、何登場した。さあ、ごめん。赤字じゃない。採決欠席した。採決欠席した。びっくりした。さあ、ごめんなさい。新聞で報告した。すいませんね。あれ、知ってました。うん。ジョレティンガーの息子さん。すごいですね。私もこっそり言ってました。さあ、ミャンマーと人脈。言ってましたね。すいませんね。シンガポール国際。テレビ。Thank you. The money is going to mega tech 5 companies or Tesla, and they are digital company, but at the same time they claim renewable energy 100 corporation. So digital transformation and together with the sustainability transformation. 意外と日本芸能界で賛美。もう賛美されてるんや。別に。やっぱ若い交渉してたか。ほんまにこの芸能みさん、もしかしてクリンゲルとああ、やっぱりね。これは商会や。ダメやったな。俺はすごいよ、若い人やと。本当に今。どうちゃんが言ってん。すまん。もう、バカにってほっといてくれ。もう、原因でもうちょっと別れた。別れてもたんやさ。スタークルーが商会。もう結成するって議論してたんや。交渉してましたよ。浦部さん社長と交渉してたよ。ようやく持つとか。あなたも知ってるのに見たいんやさ。アメリカさん、モストの戦法を使った。なんか複雑やな、茨城。そうだ、茨城結構宇宙開発してる。なんでいつも埼玉なのかな。なんか意味があったのかな。今よ、これ喧嘩売り行ってたのに。いや、喧嘩売り行ってたのに。やっぱ宇都宮か。なんか、ほんで群馬のアイヌ発言か。何よ、私はユナイテッド・ネーションズミッションって感じで安保闘争で調査してるんです。こっちの敦賀も調査してる。被害状況ね。ちょっと調査してるんや。もう、そう、もう、当事者会だったらよかったね。逆に皮肉やな。加害者が、俺はこんな姿です。重いぞ、本当に。まあ、調査させてもらった。うん。あえてちょっと。幸いのことにカザフスタン製あるからね。幸いソビエトね。193ソビエトクーデター。あれね、ごめんなさいね、あんまり、幸いスプートニクさんブランド。同じなんで、ロシアトゥデイ。同じ系列やったんだ。うん、ダメ。知ってたね、いや、ロースティ。同じだったんだ。うん。SOD ですが報道されている。テルマさん知ってましたよ。シリア枠でも参加できる。知ってましたよ。知ってたからね。サーディアのザギーさん、正味やからね。私もね、また来て。テルマさんの正面やな。テルマさん、もしかしてワタミの無関係なのね。また架空で交渉起こります。ヒエラさんと今回若手やった船橋が言ってた。この二人架空で安保討論さお前で襲われたんです。要は俺の事件を革命的なです。やっちまったよ。そう、みんな戦ってるよ。そう、前回とは違って。そう、意外な事実だ。そう。笹川陽一さんがさ、捕まってた。電通の里見はじめ一家とか、電通の会社に。導入したよね。自由防衛。 結構報道の自由みたいな。報道連合がなぜかというと NHK 解散させましたよ。フジテレビの呼びかけだ。フジテレビの呼びかけだ。しました。日テレは反対したから、もう解体する。藤井さん、しかない読みための3件の呼びかけで、もう嫌な人は中日新聞賛成しました。はい。安保闘争の声明だじゃん。両陣でも自制って、そう呼びかけてデモ隊とね、そう曲なんて、デモ隊に自制呼びかけたら、もう、自制呼びかけたら、もう、ダメやったよ、さあ、切れちまったよ。逆に言うと、515事件と226事件、雪辱で、果たす公金の許せんかったよ。よくとは関係ないんだよ。恨んでたよ。赤木さんで最後はこの515時226時恨んでました。知ってました赤木さん、お孫さん、びっくりしたさ。防衛大臣だったと。びっくりした。もう知ってました。片足だよ。赤木宗男さん、ご遺族たち、あなたたちは証言して。パペットはほっとけ。ほっとけ。逆に言うと、皮肉なことに水目が岸信介の孫でした。孫ないよ、あいつが。孫でした。渡辺晋は逆に言うと、岸信介の息子でした。そうだろう。信介。逆転してます。花見系は残念な岸信介の孫でした。そうだろう。その花見系のあいつお前もなんで責任転嫁してたしって。ああ先にやったって言って。水上ね、京都地裁が打って。いろいろ何しに来たか。あそこの駐車場へ止めてて、お前帰ったんや。なんでかというと、やっぱ京都危なかったから、やっぱ京都。だからやっぱ右翼団体の出現場所が、どうに神戸の6代目が納得や。びっくりした。逆に言うと、俺は愛知県の司信夫やし、聞いてるか知ってたか司信夫ね。すいませんね、篠田さんでしょ。あれは別です。ミレニアムの時のあの方です。感じないでしょ。大体東方はこれです。私ですよ、あだめ。右翼とは無関係で言います。関わると、本当に。人たち、あそこの急なの知ってるで。やばい、右翼の巣窟か。いや、右翼団体巣窟やって、やっぱり右翼団体の巣窟か、ここも。んでか。永田敦樹の水内とか、右翼団体から大日本県政。あんなテロ組織。ラーメン天平ね、中川店長知ってましたよ。あれ破産したよ。やっぱりな。させられたらどうやるしまったな。最悪や。私はヤクザと極左より日本の右翼団体に問題した。一番問題したさ。警戒者一番問題した。埼玉の事件でさ、俺が多分左翼とね左翼とねヤクザの暴力団関係者、ちょっと弁護するわ。弁護しに行くわ。弁護しに行くわ。さ行くわ。もうさ行くわ。最大革命マルクス先生、弁護士同伴が認められているからね。気づかなかったら皆さん歯を書いてます。知ってるでしょ、法務省。なんか弁護士無理だって。なんか来てやったでしょ。これは俺のことだ。まあ、びっくりした。どんなに
汚くてもこの水を飲むしかない。
この安藤ってあんちゃんじゃなくて、これは井上のことだよ。
The
この方がビルダーバーグではアジアの大本部のCEO、最高執行責任者、最高執行。この方ね、今ヨーロッパにどこにいるか教えようかな。あ、フランスです。私は。ほらね。
or carbon-related technologies, efficiency in a difficult sector, in the industry, and new regulations. So we need really double or triple our effort to make it happen. One of the areas which IA focused on is hydrogen. Hydrogen can be used to store the electricity generated by wind or solar, which is very volatile, and storage is the key element. So battery may not necessarily be enough, so hydrogen can be used. And also hydrogen can be used for steel, cement, some of the industries where the decarbonization is very difficult. So that's another area. The third one will be the hydrogen could be the new transport.
さんご登場です。最高執行理事です。
technologies about renewables or carbon-related technologies, efficiency in a difficult sector, in the industry, and the new regulations. So we really double or triple our effort to make it happen. One of the areas which IA focused on is hydrogen. Hydrogen can be used to store the electricity generated by wind or solar, which is very volatile, and storage is the key element. So battery may not necessarily be enough, so hydrogen can be used. And also hydrogen can be used for steel, cement, some of the industries where the decarbonization is very difficult. So that's another area. The third one will be the hydrogen could be the transformation for the sectors of oil or gas producing country. If they can remove carbon dioxide from oil or gas or coal, then these hydrocarbons change into the very friendly, climate-friendly resources. So this may prevent the hydrocarbon as a stranded asset. So maybe the hydrogen is one of the key area. We need lots of infrastructure building, technologies are necessary, but hydrogen may give us a good chance to achieve the sustainable future.
まあね。うん。分かった。決定やばい。タモリさんでした。タモリさんでした。タモリさん決定。だろタモリさん。うん。どうですか。この方何を喋ってる？君たちもしかしてこの方誰だと思ったら本当だよ。おい、これ国際評議会のメンツやぞ。セイバーのメンツやぞこの方。おい、文句言いに行ったやろ。だからね、やばいよ。4年間じゃスパイクよ。おかしくなって。意外なことに笹井理事長が承認でした。びっくりしたさ。と思ったら寮の問題委員会のメンバーいわゆるラジゲン権無関係だ。みんなね、詐欺したんよ、俺に対して。俺が声優みたいなことやでよくあります。だけど水には言ったんよ、俺専門学校に行きたいって。お金ないで。そっち来やねん、保釈金。あれ言ってもんだ、150万の保釈金。証明や、詐欺やったよ、当時。しまってん。共謀罪適用外の適用対象。もう一度で共謀罪適用対象になるで。状況によってなるんで気をつけてね。現に俺も逮捕されてるからね。俺は隠密活動になりました。メンバーになって。いやこれだったから。これはすごかった。以上です。